Hello learners, welcome to the video lesson 10 where the mind is without fear, composed by Rabindranath Tagore of senior secondary level English. Coming to the introduction, reading poetry well is part attitude and part technique. Curiosity is a useful attitude, especially when it's free of preconceived ideas about what poetry is or should be. Effective technique directs your curiosity into asking questions, drawing you into a conversation with the poem. The goal of careful reading is often to take up a question of meaning, an interpretative question that has more than one answer. Since the form of a poem is part of its meaning, for example, features such as repetition and rhyme may amplify or extend the meaning of a word or idea, adding emphasis, texture, or dimension. Questions about form and technique, about observable features of a poem, provide an effective point of entry for interpretation. To ask some of these questions, you'll need to develop a good ear for the musical qualities of language, particularly how sound and rhythm relate to meaning. This approach is one of many ways into a poem. Tagore was born on 7th of May 1861 into a Pirali Brahmin family from Calcutta. He was brought up mainly by servants because his mother died when he was very small and his father had to travel widely. Tagore's family was at the forefront of the Bengal Renaissance. They hosted the publication of literary magazines, theatre and recitals of Bengali and Western classical music featured there regularly. Tagore's family was known for its scholarliness. He was considered as a Bengali polymath who reshaped Bengali literature and music as well as Indian art with contextual modernism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Author of Gitanjali and its profoundly sensitive, fresh and beautiful verse, he became the first non-European to win the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913. He started writing poetry when he was just 8 years old, and by 1877 he graduated to writing short stories. At the age of 11, he toured India with his father. At the end of the tour, they reached Dalhousie, where Tagore read biographies, studied history, astronomy, modern science and Sanskrit, and the classical poetry of Kalidas. As a humanist, universalist, internationalist, and ardent nationalist, he denounced the British Raj and advocated independence from Britain. He was responsible for introducing new prose and verse forms and the use of colloquial language into Bengali literature, thereby freeing it of traditional Sanskrit models. It was through his literature that he was able to project the Indian culture to the West. In translation, his poetry was viewed as spiritual and mercurial. In Tagore's philosophy of education, the aesthetic development of the senses was as important as the intellectual, if not more so, and music, literature, art, dance, and drama were given great prominence in the daily life of the school. This was particularly so after the first decade of the school. Drawing on his home life at Jorasanko, Rabindranath tried to create an atmosphere in which the arts would become instinctive. One of the first areas to be emphasized was music. Rabindranath writes that in his adolescence, a cascade of musical emotion gushed forth day after day at Jorasanko. We felt we would try to test everything, he writes, and no achievement seemed impossible. We wrote, we sang, we acted, we poured ourselves out on every side. Rabindranath Tagore writes in his work, My Reminiscences. In keeping with his theory of subconscious learning, Rabindranath Tagore never talked or wrote down to the students, but rather involved them with whatever he was writing or composing. The students were allowed to have access to the room where he read his new writings to teachers, critics, and they were encouraged to read out their own writings in special literary evenings. In teaching, also, he believed in presenting difficult levels of literature which the students might not fully grasp, but which would stimulate them. The writing and publishing of periodicals had always been an important aspect of Jorasanko life, and students at Santiniketan were encouraged to create their own publications and put out several illustrated magazines. The children were encouraged to follow their ideas in painting and drawing and to draw inspiration from the many visiting artists and writers. Most of Rabindranath Tagore's dramas were written at Santiniketan, and the students took part in both the performing and production sites. He writes how well the students were able to enter into the spirit of the dramas and perform their roles, which required subtle understanding and sympathy without special training. He created a legacy for India by founding the Visva Bharati University, the meeting ground of cultures as Rabindranath Tagore envisioned at Visva Bharati. Should be a learning center where conflicting interests are minimized, where individuals work together in a common pursuit of truth and realize that arts in all parts of the world have created forms of beauty. Scientists discovered secrets of the universe, philosophers solved the problems of existence, saints made the truth on the spiritual world, organic in their own lives, not merely for some particular race to which they belonged, but for all mankind. Tagore's novels, stories, songs, dance, dramas, and essays covered themes of all sorts of themes, ranging from very political, social to personal. His best-known works are Gitanjali, Song Offerings, Gora, Fair-Faced, and Ghare Baire, The Home and the World. His compositions were chosen by two nations as national anthems, India's Jana Gana Man and Bangladesh's Amar Shonar Bangla. Coming to the social political scene in India at the time of composing Gitanjali. The English version of Gitanjali, published in 2012, and won him the Nobel Prize and was widely acclaimed in the West. It consisted of more than 100 poems or songs. India was under British rule, and the people were not just an exploited and oppressed lot, they were victims of their own value systems, torn with caste creed, superstitions, and beliefs. As a poet, Rabindranath Tagore has been compared to Shakespeare in the West. His poetry is often loaded with meanings for which he chooses words with great care. In a poem that expresses Tagore's goals for international education, he writes, "Where the mind is without fear," which is one example of his work. The poem is loaded with many meanings. About the poem, Where the Mind is Without Fear. Learners, Where the Mind is Without Fear was included in the volume called Naibedya. The original poem bears the title Prarthana, meaning prayer. The poem is a prayer to God. The poem was written by Rabindranath Tagore during the time when India was under the British rule and people were eagerly waiting to get their freedom from the British rule. The people must live a life of self-respect and dignity. This can only be done when people are free from outside bondage, as well as their own inner conflicts of minds or confines of minds, which comes from blind belief, prejudice, and superstition. He wants a world where everyone gains free knowledge and live in unity and harmony. People should be truthful, honest, sincere, and should strive for excellence in whatever they do. The poem had given a lot of strength to the people who were struggling for India's independence. It is a prayer to the Almighty for a hassle-free nation, free from any kind of manipulative or corrupted powers. This poem explains the dream of poet for his nation. The poet articulates his love and thoughts for his nation in this poem. He requests God to make his nation ideal. He has lots of desires for his nation in his head. For Tagore, it was of the highest importance that people be able to live free and reason and in freedom. The poem is written in the form of a prayer to the God, the Almighty, for a true freedom for his country. And thus, Tagore reveals his own concept of freedom throughout the poem. His attitudes toward politics and culture, nationalism and internationalism, tradition and modernity can all be seen in the light of this belief. As a humanist, universalist, internationalist, he denounced the British Raj and advocated independence from Britain. Later in 1911, Tagore himself translated the Bengali poem into English, and that translation appeared as poem 35 in his Nobel-winning anthology, Gitanjali, Song Offerings, published by the Indian Society, London in 1912. So when the poem was written, India was under the British rule, and the people were eagerly waiting to get their freedom from the British rule. The poem is written in the form of a prayer to the God, the Almighty, for a true freedom for his country. And thus, Tagore reveals his own concept of freedom throughout the poem. The poet prays to God to bless his country, where everyone lives in unity and each man is free to move around with his head held high with dignity. He should be free from all kinds of oppression or forced compulsion. He wishes for a nation where the knowledge is not chained by narrow ideas and loyalties of caste, creed, religion, and also personal prejudices and superstitions. Tagore wants his countrymen to be honest, truthful, and courageous. It should be a nation where everyone is free to toil and work hard for anything they desire. Everyone should be encouraged to strive tirelessly, and their goal should be perfection. People should be free from the shackles of blind superstition, habits, thoughts, and actions which blur his mind and do not let him see reason. They need not dwell into the mistakes of the past, but use logic and reasoning to move on to carving a bright future. If India can attain this, it would be comparable to heaven. Tagore prays to the Almighty to help his country achieve such a state of heavenliness. Tagore had deep religious roots, and his work reflects profound humanism. Tagore was both a patriot and a global citizen. In the poem, Where the Mind is Without Fear, Tagore sketches a moving picture of the nation he would like India to be. Learners, let us read the poem. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its ways into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Learners, let us now paraphrase each line. Line number 1, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. The poet prays to the Almighty that his countrymen should be free from any kind of fear of oppression or forced compulsion. He wishes that his countrymen walk with their heads high with pride and dignity. Line number 2, where knowledge is free. Here the poet dreams of a nation where everybody is allowed access to knowledge and education irrespective of caste, color, or creed. The children should learn freely from the nature and the world around them. They should not be forced to memorize some predetermined lessons. And this is Tagore's typical concept of education. Lines 3 and 4, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls. The poet stresses on the unity of not just his countrymen, but also the entire world. He does not want a world where people are divided and discriminated on the basis of caste, creed, color, religion, and other baseless superstitions. Line number 5, where words come out from the depth of truth. He wants people to be honest and truthful in whatever they do and say. They should not have double standards, but whatever they say should be from the depth of their hearts. Line number 6, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection. In the 6th line, the poet wants everyone to strive tirelessly to reach their goal and in the long run to reach perfection. People should not be lazy and ignoring their work. Lines 7 and 8, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habits. In this line, the words clear stream of reason are compared to logical thinking, dreary desert to baseless beliefs which are unproductive, and dead habits to beliefs and superstitions. The poet would want his people to develop the ability to think clearly and logically rather than become slaves of superstition and baseless belief. Lines 9 and 10, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action. The poet now wishes his countrymen to be liberal, progressive, and broad-minded. He wants their minds to be led forward by the Lord Almighty into an ever-widening world of thought and action. Line 11, into that heaven of freedom, my father, let my country awake. In the final line of the poem, the poet addresses the god as father and asks him to create this awakening in his people so that the country becomes a heaven of freedom. Freedom can be enjoyed only when people are free from all ills and evil thoughts or practices. To the poet, political freedom is not as important as it is for people to be fearless, dignified, knowledgeable, truthful, hardworking, and broad-minded. Only then can true freedom be enjoyed by one and all. Coming to the central idea of the poet feels that for people to enjoy freedom, it was necessary for them to break all those shackles, political, social, or even personal beliefs and superstitions. Unless they are fearless, knowledgeable, and can think clearly and logically, gaining political freedom would do them no good. He wants his men to be able to live in dignity, which will come from being hardworking, courageous, and open-minded. The poem was written when India was under the British rule and the Indians struggled for freedom. But for Tagore, freedom was more than merely political. He dwelt on the theme of spiritual freedom, freedom of mind, speech, thought, belief, practice, and behavior. Coming to the literary devices in the poem, the first and foremost is personification. Here, an inanimate thing is actually made to behave like humans. The whole poem is an example of personification. Examples: word come out of the depths of truth. Number 2, tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection. Number 3, clear stream of reason has not lost its way. Number 4, the dreary desert sand of dead habit. All personification. Next, alliteration. Repetition of sounds. Alliteration is derived from Latin's latera. It means letters of alphabet. It is a stylistic device in which a number of words having the same first consonant sound occur close together in a series. Examples: dreary desert, sand of dead habit, DDD, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, SS. Some more from the world: Dunkin' Donuts, PayPal, Best Buy, Coca-Cola. Next, symbolism. Symbolism is the use of symbols to signify ideas and qualities by giving them symbolic meanings that are different from their literal sense. Head is held high, stands for pride and also emancipation of India. Narrow domestic walls refers to social boundaries based on caste, class, creed, etc. Metaphor. Learners, metaphor is a figure of speech which makes an implicit, implied or hidden comparison between two things that are unrelated but share some common characteristics. In other words, a resemblance of two contradictory or different objects is made based on a single or some common characteristics. Freedom of heaven, stream of reason, sand of dead habit. Coming to the form and structure of the poem, it has 11 lines of unequal length. There is no versification and is written in free verse. Learners, you must read the poem, read it with a pencil, examine the basic subject of the poem, consider the context of the poem, study the form of the poem, look at the word choice of the poem, and then finish up. Some valuable quotes by Rabindranath Tagore. You can't cross the sea merely by standing and staring at the water. Beauty is truth's smile when she beholds her own face in a perfect mirror. Faith is the bird that feels the light when the dawn is still dark. The highest education is that which does not merely give us information, but makes our life in harmony with all existence. Let us not pray to be sheltered from dangers, but to be fearless when facing them. Learners, here we come to the end of the lesson. Prepare well for your exams. Thank you so much.
हिंदुस्तान के हर कोने में नौजवानों के पास प्रतिभा है, उन्हें अवसर चाहिए।
NIOS देता रहा है युवाओं को अवसर आगे बढ़ने का। NIOS से पढ़ने वाले इन युवाओं ने किया है संस्थान को गौरवान्वित। दिव्यांगों ने बन के दिखाया है सबल और आत्मनिर्भर। NIOS के साथ आप भी जुड़िए NIOS के संग।
घर बैठे पाएं राष्ट्रीय मुक्त विद्यालय शिक्षा संस्थान यानी NIOS में एडमिशन, वो भी एकदम आसान तरीके से, जिससे शिक्षार्थियों को होगी समय और धन दोनों की बचत। NIOS से शिक्षा कभी भी कहीं भी। शिक्षार्थियों, क्या आप जानते हैं NIOS में एडमिशन लेने का सरल और सुगम तरीका, जिससे शिक्षार्थियों को ऑनलाइन प्रवेश लेने में सहूलियत मिलती है। NIOS में प्रवेश की प्रक्रिया पूर्णतया ऑनलाइन है। शिक्षार्थी घर बैठे इंटरनेट द्वारा प्रवेश के लिए सबसे पहले NIOS की वेबसाइट www.nios.ac.in पर लॉगिन करें। अपना ईमेल आईडी और पासवर्ड डालकर अपना पंजीकरण करें। पंजीकरण के बाद लॉगिन करने पर ऑनलाइन प्रवेश हेतु आवेदन पत्र खुलेगा। आवेदन पत्र को निर्देशानुसार भरें और प्रिंट आउट लें। इस प्रिंट आउट पर अपनी फोटो संलग्न करें। ऑनलाइन प्रवेश के लिए शुल्क हेतु भुगतान के तरीके हैं: क्रेडिट कार्ड के द्वारा, डेबिट कार्ड के द्वारा, राष्ट्रीयकृत बैंक के ड्राफ्ट के माध्यम से, जो कि सचिव NIOS नई दिल्ली या नोएडा के पक्ष में देय हो। भरे हुए आवेदन पत्र के साथ साथ डिमांड ड्राफ्ट और संलग्न किए जाने वाले दस्तावेज हैं: जन्म रजिस्ट्रार के जिला कार्यालय से जारी जन्म प्रमाण पत्र की सत्यापित प्रति, जिसमें जन्म तिथि अंकित हो, पिछले विद्यालय से प्राप्त विद्यालय छोड़ने का प्रमाण पत्र, जिसमें आवेदक की जन्म तिथि लिखी हो। प्रवेश फॉर्म का प्रिंट आउट NIOS के संबद्ध क्षेत्रीय केंद्रों पर 10 दिनों में पहुंच जाना चाहिए। अन्यथा उचित दस्तावेज न लगे होने पर आवेदन फॉर्म रद्द किया जा सकता है। प्रवेश प्रक्रिया की पुष्टि होने के बाद शिक्षार्थियों को परिचय पत्र व अध्ययन सामग्री डाक द्वारा तुरंत पहुंचाई जाती है। ऑनलाइन प्रवेश एक बहुत ही सुगम और सुविधाजनक प्रवेश प्रणाली है। ऑनलाइन ऑन टाइम फॉर सेफ एंड सिक्योर एडमिशन।
करने राहों को आलोकित करने, जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने राहों को आलोकित करने, हम अपना दीपक स्वयं बने, हम अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने, हम अपना दीपक स्वयं बने, हम अपना जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने राहों को आलोकित करने। धन साधन समय की सीमा से विद्यालय जो मुक्त हो, कभी पढ़े हम कहीं पढ़े वे विषय की लोच से युक्त हो, कभी पढ़े हम कहीं पढ़े वे विषय की लोच से युक्त हो, मित्रों हम उठे और जागे, मंजिल आने की ध्वनि सुने, हम अपना दीपक स्वयं बने, हम अपना जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने राहों को आलोकित करने। राष्ट्रीय मुक्त विद्यालय का है द्वार खुला सबकी खातिर, शिक्षा परीक्षा का बार ही क्यों मिलता फिर शिक्षा परीक्षा का अवसर एक बार ही क्यों मिलता